This is Restless. Welcome back to the last episode of Restless Summer. I may have commuted on my bike for the first time today, but Pastor Michael, today is the last episode of Restless Summer. So everyone, raise your glass, raise your tankard, raise your bottle, your water bottle if you're at a gym, or your coffee cup in your car, because it's the end of Restless Summer. Everyone here is raising a drink of unnamed natures. Pastor Michael, how are you doing tonight?
Man, I'm doing well. So I mentioned this earlier, but I had a drink with 2 shots of espresso in it today, and I almost never have caffeine. This was in the morning. I'm still just wired, and I've had such a productive day. I feel like I'm just on this drug high from the caffeine. And so it just makes me a little bit extra happy and excited. And hopefully this episode goes well. We're going on 2 weeks where I have in some way, maybe not messed up the episode, because last week's was okay, but did something that kind of messed with our normal. So hopefully tonight goes well.
So Pastor Michael is a little bit extra tonight. We are going to record late into the night with that kind of mojo.
Let's do it.
We are actually this week talking about a subject that we really have needed to talk about here with the young, restless, and reform movement for a long time, which is church planting. And to do that, we are bringing on someone, a guest we have worked harder than any other guest to bring on, a PCA church planter, personal friend, seminarian, Ben Leatherberry. Welcome to Restless.
Thank you very much. I am very highly esteemed with that introduction.
You are indeed highly esteemed. Ben, you earlier, which I'll just chop that out to the patrons today. We'll call it on the cutting room floor. You got me to tell a personal story about the many layers of my life.
If anyone's an onion, Matt, it is indeed you.
That's right. And sometimes I kick girls in the face. So you can pay us a little bit of money and listen to that.
Seriously,
if you're so interested.
This kind of burying it a little bit there, but man, this was a story about Matt kicking a girl in the face. That's not even a joke. And so if you want to hear that, you got to join Patreon. You got to be a patron. It doesn't take much, $3 a month, and you can hear this story.
That's right. Well, tonight you're going to hear about, or today, or this morning, you're going to hear about church planting. Pastor Michael, this was a major thing of the young, restless, and reformed, and we are at least hopefully going to prove to everyone that it's not just for the new Calvinists either. I'll be honest, as I was thinking about this, I don't think I'd ever even heard the term church planting before the young, restless, and reformed. And again, I grew up in an evangelical church that even had a lot of emphasis on missions in general, but we didn't talk about church planting. That was something I came across from Mark Driscoll, Acts 29, and that cast of characters. What about you? Does this is this where you come from, or do you have a different are you coming at this from a different place?
That's an interesting question. I do feel like it's probably the first I really thought about it, at least in terms of what the church was supposed to do in multiplication. At least the first time I gave it any thought was kind of with the YRR crowd. I don't, when I look back, I like to think that probably I just wasn't listening, that
right.
People talked about maybe being, actually, so I grew up in a church it was kind of like a plant off of, a bigger evangelical church in the area. And so, there's elements of that I was just a part of, a smaller, younger church growing up. And so, maybe that was part of it, that I didn't hear a lot about it because we were a smaller, younger church, right? You're not going to maybe be planting right away, at least not normally, maybe sometimes. But anyway, so I guess probably coming from a fairly similar place to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think it is interesting that the YRR really took up the mantle of church planting, like that they made that one of their major emphases as time went on. Ben, do you want to tell us a little bit about how either you became Reformed, how you came to be doing church planting, and who you're church planting with, because I assume since you're on this show, though Acts 29 church planners, we still have a standing invitation for all of you to come and talk to us. We would have a good time, we promise.
Indeed. Yeah, I appreciate that, Matt. I will say this: I am not yet ordained in the PCA as a church planter, though I am in the I think better than saying ordination exams, the ordination trials, because it indeed feels that way, as you take three exams over a 3-month period, and they are stretched out, one per month, and it indeed feels like trials. But yeah, just a little bit of my background. I grew up in western Wisconsin, a little town called Chippewa Falls, and yeah, I grew up with a Lutheran background, but you know, I was someone who probably came to faith through Campus Crusade for Christ as a college student and whatnot, and that or I would say I had a pretty profound experience with God's grace kind of through that avenue, and spent another number of years working with a campus ministry later on. But part of what brought me into the Reform world, though I did indeed listen to the likes of Mark Driscoll and John Piper, and my favorite for quite a time was David Platt. I never picked up or bought in fully into at least the what they would have called just Reformed in the Calvinism and the emphasis there. It was really when my wife and I, we were serving overseas for a number of years, that our local campus ministry team that we were a part of was somewhat forced into a situation where they had to plant a church. And as I reflected on it a little bit today, I was realizing that probably some of my desire to be involved with the church was even initially more of a pragmatic thing. You know, in a campus ministry world, you often, a lot of your spiritual experience and growth and so on and so forth happens outside of the institutional church. Happens all one-on-one with, you know, other maybe campus staff, perhaps, if you're in a campus ministry, or, you know, in their weekly meetings and personal quiet times and things like that. And I remember actually realizing to some degree, even in some of our conversations while we were there, like, what if there's just this place? Like, what if we ran all of our ministry through this place where we could gather everyone, like all the believers, not just students, but believers in our city, and we could like do ministry out of that as the central piece. And it was talking about the church in a pragmatic sense of not coming to it as what the church was. And like all stories with me, it is long and a bit verbose. But cutting to the chase, I think while we were there, I think I just witnessed kind of decisions being made about how we should do church. And even that just made me wonder, what is the church? What is she for? And that set me down the path of reading, you know, the likes of 9 Mark's books by Mark Dever, listening to a fantastic podcast series about I Will Be a God to You and to Your Children by R. Scott Clark some years ago. And really, I think in starting to pick up a Reformed hermeneutic kind of through all of that, I came into kind of a Reformed understanding, really initially through infant baptism, as I like to think it's kind of the weird corner window to sneak into the Reformed house. That was how I kind of came to the Reformed, was being convinced of overall kind of the hermeneutic, and really that in light of baptism and somewhat of covenant theology, and then coming around of like, oh yeah, I guess Calvinism fits with that. That makes sense. And so that was somewhat how I traversed into the Reformed world while I was in the field overseas.
That's awesome. And so you then went to plant a church, and did you do it the way where you said, you know, I've never been a member of a church, and so I figured it was a really good idea to plant a church, which is an exact quote from Mark Driscoll?
Yeah, it's like, the funny thing is, one of the campus ministry I was a part of, as I began to feel this desire, a desire to be a part, certainly of the local church, and a desire to be called to church planting. I remember telling the campus ministry I worked with, like, I really think I need to return to finish my degree, and I need elders. I need elders. I need some level of authority beyond me to affirm and extend the call, an external affirmation to go do this thing. And I remember my campus ministry being like, no, like, you can just come church plant here. And like, oh, you don't want me to, like, you shouldn't want me to do this. And so I, though that offer was put out to me. Perhaps I did not take it. So no, that wasn't how that worked out. We came back to the United States in 2019, spent a few years in a church planting apprenticeship, a CPA, the common understanding of CPA.
That's right.
Just to confuse everybody. And did that while I continued on my Master of Divinity degree for that time. But part of that was while we were here, our hearts, to some degree, we longed to reach people as we lived in the Midwest. We were serving in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Just seeing the needs immediately. Certainly, there's tons of people who are under shepherded in churches, as churches treat them as consumers and try and get their butts in their seats and continue to create services that will attract people. We saw a lot of under shepherded people, but certainly it was also seeing unchurched and de-churched people that we long to want a church plant. But you asked earlier, Matt, about who I might be planting with. And a hotter reveal than a gender reveal is a co-planter church planting reveal.
That's
you
right.
Heard it
You
here.
throw a party.
Put it on a shirt. I actually indeed will be planting with the likes of Matthew Klein, the host or one of the hosts here of Restless. And so
that's right, everybody. So we're not only revealing personal things to the patrons tonight. I will be here as a church planter alongside of Ben here in the western side of Wisconsin, the western frontier, as the senior pastor of Michael's church refers to it, which is a great joy for me. Fun. I think both of us feel not equal to the task every day, but that's great. Michael, what are your thoughts about the need or church planting here in the States in general?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a need. I mean, this is the Great Commission, right? So obviously, this is just simply the nature of faithfulness as the church is multiplication, going out, making disciples, teaching them to obey everything that Christ has commanded after and before they have been baptized. And so that takes a church, right? Like this is hard when you're from maybe a more evangelical background to see, maybe because you kind of see the Great Commission as this is something that's given to each individual, right? So I will go out and I can go and baptize as I see fit and feel called to, and I can teach in this way. But what Christ is actually commanding is something for the church, right? He's talking to the apostles and their commission being passed then on to the church, institutionally speaking, that we are to go out and make disciples, which means we're going to have to plant churches. So I love it. I think it's great. I think it'd be helpful, Matt. So you are going to be planting with Ben here in Wisconsin with the PCA. Can you? I mean, really, I mean, you guys are planting. I mean, you're in it now, right? I mean, you're beginning anyway. I mean, you're not ordained, but you are very much on your way. I mean, within the year, right? You'll both be ordained. Am I right to say that within the next,
Lord willing, and the creek
months,
don't
hopefully,
rise.
right?
Lord willing,
Obviously, it takes actually passing those trials of ordination because there are some pretty rigorous trials, which is good, right? It's a good process.
I think every time that I've had to do some form of examination, being in the PCA, licensure seemed actually as though it was more difficult, which Matt has also gone through, and certainly Michael, you have as well. Every time you're in the midst of it and you think, wow, this is hard, and you're like, wow, I really don't want anyone to be my pastor who hasn't done this, right? Who hasn't, gone through the trial of handling God's word in such a responsible way. And so, it's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good. It's really helpful. But Matt, could you share a little bit about how you ended up planting with Ben and you guys and the history that you guys have? Because it's not as though this just was like thrown together suddenly.
Right.
But you guys are not, it's not like you just met on this podcast.
It is true. Though I'm sure we, maybe we'll just finagle Ben into being the always third host. That's the dream, as Ben just kind of shakes his head, but that's okay. Other great things will be coming. So Ben and I have known each other for I don't know how many years now.
Several. That's
Several.
That's a broad enough term.
More than
Several.
I mean, several to me is like 3 to 5.
Well,
But you've known each other for
several.
more than
It literally
3 to 5.
has half. Of
I've
the
known
word of
Ben.
seven
I've known
in
you
it.
for 3 to 5 years.
Let me
Right?
let me share Ben's first impression of me, since we're just telling people about me tonight, which is great. So we met at a some kind of a campus ministry conference where they were talking to people about going into full-time ministry, and we
Is
had
this
a mute.
before you
This is
moved
before.
overseas?
This is before
Okay, you guys met
we ended
beforehand.
up in the same place together in ministry. And we had a mutual friend who kind of knew we both were kind of seemingly headed in the same direction. And he is like a really big, friendly, relational connector guy. And he goes, Matt, you've got to come over here and meet Ben, my friend from Green Bay. I think you guys may like end up in the same place together. And I go over and I give the most like lack of enthusiasm. Like, again, forgive me, I'm like 21 at the time. So I go, oh, hey, I'm Matt. Nice to meet you. And then I put no effort to speak to Ben at all and then walk away. So
This is true.
Ben, how did you feel about this? Right? Tell me from your perspective what this was like.
he just talked to a guy he's never going to see again.
Yeah. I was like, put him on a list of guys who don't care to talk to me ever again. I was like, but for all the things that Matt is extremely gifted at, of which there are many.
Paintball, kicking girls in the face.
Those are just
Patreon
in the top.
if you want to know more about that.
Podcasting.
Those are just in the top 10. I mean, there's a whole host of things, but it's the first 15 minutes of meeting a person is not one of those like have a gregarious encounter with a person. That Matt doesn't live there. Good after that, he will be a fantastic friend to the grave to so many, but that's not where he thrives.
You heard it here first, folks. If you ever meet me in person after listening to me on this podcast, it will probably be a bit of a letdown. So Ben and I then spend years together in ministry overseas, which is a great blessing. And when Ben and his family left to come back to the United States, it was a huge loss after years together. And just over time becoming very single-minded and understanding of, both theology, but just family and ministry practice and desires. But though I, of course, was happy that, he was going to go and, he was going to pursue what he was pursuing. And strangely enough, I found myself in the U.S. and the place where Ben and I are going to plant is a city in Wisconsin called Eau Claire. So Ben, the town Ben talked about growing up in, is basically connected to this town. They're kind of 10 minutes to driving. I grew up an hour south of here with Michael, as some people know, in the same area. And both of us began indicating to the PCA. I indicated willingness, and Ben had kind of come around to going to his hometown and planting. And I guess the one maybe important thing to note is a really great thing that is actually happening in the Wisconsin PCA is a really big emphasis on church planting. Michael and I have mentioned this on the show many times. Nobody knows what a Reformed church is here in the Midwest, let alone a Presbyterian church, other than like the mainline churches that are the same as all the other mainline churches in town. No one knows what that would mean. And so the presbytery here has placed a huge emphasis on church planting. And in my mind, in some ways, replanting, because all of these towns had Presbyterian churches at one time that have just fallen away, that, were not faithful to theology. And so it is a real process. I do think that this is perhaps one of the best things, and one of the hardest things is, we started talking about this potential plant years ago, and then being examined by various different people together and separately. And people were at times fairly skeptical of two people doing it together, though that is one of the things Ben and I would be willing to, I don't know, describe as almost the ideal. We understand the challenges to it, but certainly the ideal. And And now, after being examined, after, all of these processes, getting to this point, it has been more than 2 years
Yeah.
of serious and committed thinking and planning and work.
Oh man. Yeah. It's been quite some time. I think part of the story just for both Matt and I is when we left overseas and Matt and his family remained. And for us, when we left overseas, we had left the door open of wanting to return to some degree. We just, part of the call was, I only ever followed calls that, felt good in my tummy, if I can say that. I felt the warmth in my chest that I wanted to go do this thing. And so to go in church plant, right, or at least to go into some level of pastoral ministry, we needed a calling that wasn't just internal, but one that was external. So that was partially why we left overseas, was to come finish schooling and to receive that external call. And while we were in the U.S., this was shortly before the chaos of 2020 kicked off. The Lord began to change my wife and my heart, even to think about returning to Western Wisconsin, where I grew up. And I was indeed a very wicked young man. Praise God for His mercy on me, and I hoped I would never return to my hometown. And little did we know at this time that the Kleins also were considering a return. Or their family was considering a return to the U.S. And they sat on our couch, and I think the early winter of 2020 or the end of 2019, and we're like, "What are you guys going to do for the rest of your lives?" And they said, "We think we want to go plant in Eau Claire, Wisconsin." I said, "No, like that's what we want to do." And then it was a race to who could go ask the PCA committee to let them go do it first. No, we asked, and they said, "Why don't you think about doing it together?" And I think we believe also in kind of team-based ministry. When we start talking about church planting, I think there's a lot of things that come to mind as I continue to learn. I said the word church plant. There's a lot of things that come into people's minds, probably in the Reform world. They're like, I don't know if I'm crazy about whatever you think you're going to go do. What's your brand? How are you going to be sexy enough to get people to come to your thing? And I'm like, wait, what? Aren't we like the ordinary means people? Like, aren't we like Reformed people? We have to be like the least original. Like, we have confessions, and like I just learned the PCA had a motto as I was going through ordination. I was like, that's a real bummer. I missed that when I came in, of being being faithful to the scriptures, true to the Reformed faith, and obedient to the Great Commission. And so I think it's we're of the church planting mind of being as boring as possible when it comes to the originality factor, because the church has the message, and even the pathway, we see it in the scriptures, and so going and engaging the ordinary means, right, and watching Christ build His church.
I think that as I've thought about this again, I do think there is, right, church planting isn't just for the YRR. But again, with this idea of two people, there are, again, what it cuts against, we've learned, is the idea of the church planter as the guy, right? Like, because again, even in the Reformed world, the church planter is kind of viewed in a very personality-based way. And now, again, calling, gifting, leading, that's fine. I'm not opposed to that. But what if it was possible to start with a plurality of leadership, which we all claim is the biblical and ideal model, and in fact is the way Christ began ministry after Him, right? I think that, I also think that the amount of process and the amount of work that that the PCA puts into church planting cuts against the idea of it's this big entrepreneurial thing where like you are out here like motivating people, Gary V style, to get up and follow you and do all this. It's the opposite of that being an influencer. I just think that you learn it cuts against most of these things. And I do think that, as I've realized thinking about the PCA and learning about its history, how much emphasis the founders of the PCA put into church planting. This is actually not something. So I think sometimes, at least I was thinking this way, that the YRR was all about church planting and other Reformed people kind of hopped on the wagon along the way. And so that we caught the missional quote unquote bug from the new Calvinists. It is both, I think, conceptually and actually very concretely the other way. So the PCA has been about church planting forever. Think about where the new Calvinists learned things. And then two, if you've listened to that bonus episode of the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, it was an incredibly wealthy PCA church that bankrolled Mark Driscoll in Acts 29. Right? It is, and it's something that is reformed because it is a reformed emphasis on mission, right? It's not even like, it's not a PCA thing. It's just, it's obviously we would just call it a biblical thing at the end of the day. But
yeah, I mean, how much of the reason that we growing up in a more kind of evangelical climate, where there was church planting, right? There's faithful people trying to plant churches and doing missions, but the focus was almost always on like individual missionaries, right? Going out, doing their thing. And that was kind of the focus as far as I can think, missions wise. And the idea of like more local or regional church planting was not it just wasn't as much of a priority. And so much of that, I think, comes down to the ecclesiology behind it all, right? Like we believe that the fulfilling of the Great Commission requires the multiplication of churches. Whereas if you think that like any individual can just get up and just go and do these things, right, that they can on their own be the discipler who's baptizing them and teaching them, like they can just fulfill it all, right? Well, then you're sending individuals out to do individual missions all over the place. Whereas again, we think as Reformed people, we believe that the Great Commission requires the multiplication of the institutional church.
And I think with that, Michael, I mean, this is the model. I do think, and that phrase probably right there, put it on a shirt, because right, everyone says like, this is the model in Acts. Come on, guys. But indeed, I mean, if right, the ministry of Paul and Barnabas, two guys, I get to be Barnabas, Matt. Boom. You're gonna leave me behind. Excellent. Some Silas, some dudes coming. No, I think, but when you see this, what do? Right? They're going out. They spend time. What do they? Acts 14:23 before the Acts 15 before the council, they set up elders, and what is it done by? Right, the raising of hands. It doesn't come through from the Greek quite in the English, but it's the congregation choosing them. Then you see churches that are. I mean, you don't have to say church planting. Say something else. Use some other vernacular so that we can at least get to that clear picture of what you do see happening. Then throughout much of Acts until Paul heads back to Jerusalem and then heads off obviously towards Rome. And so that is the pattern. And right, he writes to, and I think to your point, Michael, and right, 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, you talk about the qualifications. They shouldn't be someone who's a new believer, right? But that's so often what I think so many ministries, you say, well, they're on fire. That's the hot language, right? Pun. That was an unintentional pun, but right, they're on fire for the Lord. Send them out. Well, passion gets us in a whole lot of trouble. I think plenty of people understand that, but as I like to tell some evangelical friends here, we in the Reform world like to do things with about 6 seat belts. So if you know why we haven't started services yet, or why we, take things slow, there's reasons why. So to your points.
Yeah. So could you, let's push into that a little bit more. We've talked about, I mean, this has come out in everything that we've said so far. We already see it, but let's try to lay out a little bit more clearly, maybe what are maybe some things that will be different between a common kind of American Christian understanding of like starting a church versus a confessionally reformed church plant?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer this in part and I'll let Ben jump in. And there's a few potential objections I think we should raise against ourselves. But this reminds me of the question my daughter asked me while we were driving in the car the other day. She said, "So, Dad, how's that starting a church going?" just like, all right.
Oh, that's hilarious.
so what Ben and I have realized as we've both talked to other pastors, as we've gotten to know people, and as we've met people in the area, it's been great talking to lots of different people, kind of hearing about these different things. What we've realized is what we're doing church planting wise is in many ways it feel, at least in this area of the country, is not really being done this way. So if you're in a Reformed church that's maybe a younger church, most Reformed churches often, and I was just reading a book on Reformed church planting, come into existence this way. There's a group of Christians who have Reformed convictions, and they don't live in driving distance of a Reformed church. So they contact some Reformed denomination, PCA, the OPC, the URCNA, right? One of these Reformed, confessionally Reformed denominations, and ask them if they have a minister that would be willing to come for this church plant. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's not a negative
This is,
thing
by
at
the
all.
way, this is how the church that I pastor, Christ Covenant Church, basically how it came into being. It was a bunch of, people who were, in local churches, evangelical churches, who were becoming more Reformed. They started to gather together. They started to say, hey, we think that we should, have a Reformed church here. And then they found the PCA and said, this is what we're looking for, and then joined the PCA, right? So that is how the church that I'm a part of formed. And we were, part of now sending Matt out anyway, and, hope to support the church plant where we can in Eau Claire. And so that is,
Right.
That's the experience of a lot of people.
So we're not doing that. There's not a group of people waiting for us here. Secondly, now another way that Reformed churches often plant is actually not really a plant, it's a transplant. Again, not a bad thing. A group of people from a church go somewhere and they start a new church. That's again, I was reading that in a Reformed church planting books, calling that a transplant and not a plant. So please, no one be offended. You can call the guys at Westminster West who wrote a book and use that terminology. Then we have the other model, which we might call the more mainstream evangelical model. Ben lovingly and to no controversy in personal relationship calls it the field of dreams model. If you build it, they will come. Yep. You do whatever you can to gather as big a group as people as you can, so that people will come, so that you can preach good sermons to them, so that you can, get them to invite their lost friends. And that's how you plant a church. Well, we're not doing that either.
Well, what are you doing, Matt?
Right.
It just sounds like you're not doing anything. Is that?
I know.
What I'm hearing?
I think, is that what my daughter thought when she asked me that question?
I love that so much. By the way, I can hear it in her voice, and I just think that's so precious. And
well, we believe that there are going to be Christians who the Lord will call and raise up to join with in starting this work here, but that this church is to reach the unchurched, the de-churched, as that's what makes up a lot of the community here, and the lost. And so that just takes time. Evangelism of that kind, meeting with people, my genius missionary strategy of just meeting people and saying, would you like to read the Bible with me? This just takes time. By the way, I had to read a book to be like, that is a great idea to just invite people to that. So don't, you don't even need to credit me to that. But so that means the time it will take before we can have worship services gathering together will take longer time. But obviously the goal is, because again, the goal of church planting is worship, is the pure worship, right? When oftentimes, until too many people probably misunderstood me, I would just say the reason I want to go plant a church in Eau Claire is for the sake of pure worship there. That's why Calvin sent church planters. But Ben, how would you describe a little bit about what the work looks like? Again, the issue with this answer is that it is so big, like it's very hard to get my arms, really around in any short way.
My eldest daughter also about 9 months. Is that right?
9 months
no,
older.
6. Yeah, about 9 months older than Matt's oldest. Also asked as we were on the way to church one Sunday morning, as we've been here for about a month and a half. She said, "Dad, how do you plant a church?" And I was like, "Honey, if you find out, will you tell me?" Because I also would like to know how we might do that. And I think, I think if you're, depending who you're talking to, if you're talking to a business or entrepreneur world, you're like, yeah, we're networking, got to network. But like in Christian terms, like I think in the simplest way, I want to go to a city I want to see the Lord bring people to Christ in a church form, right? Like that's what we hope to do. We want to share our faith, disciple people in that faith, and see a church started. And I think what's so hard about that is, well, one, it's slow, and it might sound good. Like people say that everywhere else, and then we're going to be like, but we're going to have the sexiest music in town. So people get in. We're probably not going to have the sexiest music in town. We're probably not going to be.
We will have psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs.
Yes. Whoa, whoa, psalms. You heard it here, people.
That's right.
Yes or no? Yay, nay, or nuance fog machine. Huh? I've heard that people like this.
It is a hard nay. It is I would quit nay.
On the Sundays I preach, Matt's gonna actually walk with a fan behind people, so it's a semblance of the Spirit just blowing through the sanctuary, or I don't know where we'll be, right in the forest. Who knows? Wherever planters find a place to meet. But I think for us, on the front end, as someone who, again, this unintentional pun, but I am relentlessly restless in all that I do. And it's hard for me to rest in the Lord. I'm always wanting to do more. And the Lord usually causes me to get sick, as he did this last week, I think, or gave me sickness, I believe, and either discipline or his loving grace to slow me down. Our work is just simple of meeting people. I think both Matt and I, in the first couple of weeks here, we both have stories of just, we met a single mom who's moving and had nobody. She doesn't know anyone here, right? It's like, if I'm willing to be available to help somebody and to pray for them, the ministry opportunities are endless. And in both those cases, there's opportunities to say, well, why would you want to help me? Or why would you want to do these things? So I think one is we're here and we're present. I think being active in meeting new people, so Matt and I, we've been using, we used a survey actually for our final class in seminary to try and kind of get it out into the different parts of, we'll say, the interwebs, the online world here in Western Wisconsin, for people to take it so that we could reach kind of those people who, we might not be able to rub shoulders with, but we're also just building relationships with our neighbors or different places in town. And as we build relationships with them, having opportunities to share and to tell about the good news of Christ and to invite them to believe. And so I think there are some families here that are excited and ready to plant a Reformed church. But I think part of it will be, it'll just take time in these building relationships and discipling people in the faith. And as Matt said.
Yeah. And obviously one of the great benefits we have are the Reformed confessions. When we start having to train people to be elders in the church, we don't have to make that up as we go. We don't have to make up what we're all going to believe. We don't have to create polity out of thin air. We get to
that's huge. This is something that honestly, it makes me sad. I love a lot of my brothers who are out there planting independent or Baptist churches and evangelical churches that maybe they have some denominational support or support from another church, but they're basically on their own, and they'll plant a church, and it's like, well, now we got to come up with what's our doctrinal statement, right? What are all of our bylaws? What are all of these extra things? But it's everything, right? You have to reinvent the wheel. And my heart breaks for these guys a lot of the time, because I see how burned out they get. And I'm like, yeah, dude, because you're being tasked with inventing the church, but you don't have to do that, right? That to me is one of the biggest benefits of planting a confessionally Reformed church within the context of an actual, where you have right away, boom, you've got the Westminster Confession of Faith and the Larger and Shorter Catechism, right? You have the Book of Church Order to help you as you try to figure out, what does ordination for elders look like? What does discipline look like? What does anything, right? These things come up, and it's not like, well, now we got to add a new paragraph in the bylaws that we're writing and just figure it out. You've got it. It's there for you. And by the way, so maybe this would be important to say, you have, because you're under the guidance of a presbytery, you have a preliminary session, right? So these guys have a session that is an elder board, right? A group of elders from different churches within our presbytery that are already providing oversight and some accountability in this process, that you have to meet with somewhat regularly, and who are also there to help, right? Not just to like provide like, hey, are you doing your job? But also like, hey, how can we help? How can we be, assisting you? And you guys, maybe you run into a really difficult case with somebody, you don't know how to interact with them. Hey, you've got elders in churches from all around Wisconsin who you can talk to and work with. And so I just think that the benefits of having that behind you, right, undergirding you, it doesn't mean it's not going to still be extremely difficult, but it allows you to focus on the things that are most necessary, right? Like evangelism, right? Like actually gathering people in.
I think with that, Pastor Michael, 2019, the most exciting book I read, you know what it was? It was the PCA Book of Church Order. And
shout out BCO.
Again, whoa! Book of Church Order coming to you live. The reason why though is precisely what you said, Michael. It was like reading a book where you're like, wait, people have thought of this before, right? People have like written about this before. We're drawing on thousands of years of church history and the wisdom of those who have studied the scriptures to have some idea of what we might do. And I think for you, Pastor Michael, and the care, every person we meet with, when I say, are you shepherded well? This is usually the greatest longing I see in people's eyes. I'm like, do you have a pastor who knows your name and your kids' names? Do you think he prays for you? Like, just, and not to be rude, I'm genuinely asking, like, do you have that? And so to think about the work that you do in that regard, Pastor Michael, for the people in your congregation, it's so nice to say, I don't have to make decisions about all these other things because I have it, like with a confession, with a book of church order. I lean back upon the wisdom of the church for thousands of years in order to have the answers to questions that, I think for so many church planters, they're going out. And I just, when you're depending on the personality of a planter to go out there and not burn out, this is a situation I think that is so ideal in the care, as you talk about, with provisional session, the presbytery, which cares for us, calls us, and fires us if we're in a bad place. Like there's actually someone who can fire us. That should be such a comfort.
We wouldn't say fire, right? We would redirect you. Right? We would say, listen, like
that's right.
There is a different calling on you. God is closing this door. That's okay.
We're going to redirect you into truck driving, Matt. It'll be a good thing. But no one can fire me from the Restless podcast.
Can I say, Michael, I think the word is actually defrocked, because that's a much cooler word than anything
technically you can. Yeah, technically, right.
So I think
depose, actually, right. So technically you could be deposed.
That's true.
From ministry, although you're not ordained yet. So
that's true. Can't depose me yet. Sorry, take it away, Matt. I apologize.
I just think that, I think that is the thing. And there are a few things that I hope will come out of this, and we'll get to the next one after this. But I hope everyone hearing my voice right now, you have a pastor that knows your name, that prays for you. That does that, because it's as Ben and I, our experience is that it's mind blowing that when we tell people about that's a big thing we want to be true in the church, everyone goes, wow, that sounds great. That is some kind of revolution. Again, not a revolution, just the word shepherd. Like that is all that is loaded into that. I'm going to give us two objections to handle before we close out. So here's the first objection. This one is coming from my happy TR friends, who sometimes don't seem as happy as I know they are deep down, even if they're not smiling at you. So Pastor Michael, aren't the missional guys the ones ruining everything in all the Reformed churches? Aren't Ben and I the problem?
The answer is yes, Michael. I apologize. Go ahead. Go ahead, Michael. You can't say nuance. No, Michael, don't do it.
We did make a rule a while ago that I don't know that we've really followed, that I'm supposed to send a free shirt to somebody if I.
You've done it a lot less because of that. So we'll find out.
I've tried to pick. There are many. I don't know how to not nuance it.
Guys, everybody. So Ben, who should we be? We'll just do one person who shares this episode on Twitter will be getting a free shirt from Restless. Congratulations,
Yep, tag us
Pastor
in it
Michael.
because I'm about to nuance. We will send you
Go
a
and
nuance shirt,
everybody.
but you got to tag us. Make sure that we know that you tagged us. It is generally the case, as far as I can tell, that you missional guys are really screwing stuff up, right? I mean, you're just, you really are. That being said, I think, a lot of that has to do with, a tendency to kind of things maybe you could say it like this. There are those who I think are particularly gifted in mission, right? Like in evangelism, in going out and meeting people, in like just sitting out somewhere and just meeting everybody that walks by and trying to tell them about Christ. And for whatever reason it is, I don't think this is exclusively the case, but it does seem generally the case that people that have that kind of bent, gifting wise, are not usually as interested or care as much about doctrinal purity, right? I think part of it is just the nature of meeting people and being with people. And, that's just something that happens. It's, again, I don't think this is exclusively the case. I don't think it has to be the case. I just think that seems to be generally the way things have been, at least in American Christianity for a while. However, that being said, I do think that that's exactly the kind of person you want doing the missions, right? Like doing the work of going out and meeting people and evangelizing and gathering them into the church. You just need a plurality of leaders within the church where you can have a balance of those giftings, where somebody in that kind of position can come to a meeting with other leaders in the church, other elders, dare I say, who can say, no, that's like a dumb idea. We're not going to water down what we're saying here just to get those 5 people in the door. Rather, we're going to, stay true to this. And they say, okay, I'm going to submit to that. Even though I don't love it or I don't feel great about it, I'm going to submit to that and be okay with that. So this is why I think, you need a plurality of leaders within the church and the benefit of that. But yeah, you guys are sometimes ruining things. Is that an okay answer? Is that?
Yeah. Well, again, it's just an answer that is on my mind as we're friends with the Presbycast guys. And now they interview guys who plant churches, right? So it's not, again, it's not but right. It's often that the PCA in many ways, it seems like there's a fracturing among confessionalists and the missional guys. And I feel like in almost every, in my I probably affinity wise in my mind, I probably am like, oh, I'm probably one of the confessional guys. And then if someone are like, let's watch what Matt does every day. Oh, that guy's got to be one of the missional guys. Oh, he's going to go, but here's the one thing, because I do think that I think our show has made it pretty clear. The things I say on our show in criticism of what's called cultural engagement has probably made a lot of that clear. But here's the thing that just blows my mind, and that we really need to not lose along the way. Dude, the missional people are right about one thing. We have to be doing this mission.
Yep.
Right? They are actually right about that. And so whatever
and good at it. And often very good at
it. And we don't need to do it with any compromises. We don't need to do it with, we shouldn't pit these things against each other, right? There are all these things we shouldn't do, but we can't just be like, well, we are going to go ahead and be the confessional people instead. That would be a very bad dichotomy to accept.
Yep.
And I think Ben and I have found, and I'll let Ben speak to this. I think Ben and I have found that, a lot of times for the missional people, right, we talk there's got to be a lot of fancy stuff happening. You've got to do you got to be the cool guys, or you got to be you've got to be have an art gallery. You've got to be able to really interact on these certain levels. But you know what Ben and I have found? If you're willing, as Ben said, if you're willing to go help people and pray for people who are in really bad situations, do you know what? There is literally not a shortage of people that you could begin to meet with. You don't need to do any of that. And those people don't care about any of those things.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I think I understand what the concern is when you look at just American Presbyterian history, like I think, and remember, I'm in ordination trial, so these things should be fresh in my mind, but like the new side and the new school. And I mean, you have people who are fervent for the mission, and Charles Finney needed some elders. Like somebody somewhere, please say no. Please just say, like,
right.
Stop it. No.
What are you doing?
Please don't. And so I think that's part of it is there comes this idea that we have to compromise or say things in a certain way because then
we
they'll
need
be
the new
attractive.
measures. Yeah, we need
We need
something
new
new.
measures. We gotta, dare I say, Michael, nuance. Sorry, Michael. I apologize, Pastor Michael. No, but I think that's part of it is we think that the gospel itself will not attract people. And I think that's what, man, as I will just say, as a person who is coming to his hometown, as a man who is so wicked, I think as such a young man, realizing that I step into a place where, what do I need? I, as a planter in the city, need a redeemer. I need a redeemer.
Yeah.
That's what I need. And what do people need here in the city? And what do they long for? They're all walking out of paths with brokenness and sin, right? Just outright rebellion, right? They need a redeemer. And we don't have to polish that up, right? We don't have to. I used kind of the polishy word there, and even starting out with brokenness, right? We're like, no, like it's straight up sin, like we need a redeemer. One who, like Job said, will stand on the last day and we'll see him with our eyes, not another's, our own. And so I think that's part of the missional thing that's happened in the past is you have people who have gone and compromised thinking that if we can just get them in, they'll just accept the message, right? Then they'll be good. And that's, we don't have to polish the message, right? Because people want a redeemer, those who he's calling. So,
and kind of trying to take off sharp edges or polish it or whatever you want to say actually does a disservice because the redemption is deeper. It is for the things that like can't be redeemed, can't be made nice, can't be brought into the light. And because the Redeemer was killed in a grotesque way on a tree, like you can't lose that because otherwise the people, who are down and out, who really like the really bad stuff that would not feel comfortable in church life can't be redeemed. And that's obviously not the Christian message. So one more objection before we close out of here. We'll let you jump on this one because I think you might, having known you and having some awareness of the kinds of things you end up talking about. Do we really need more churches around here? Is that really that feels like a question that you may need to answer someday.
Whoa.
Yeah, hadn't thought of that.
Right, do we need more churches? Yay. Look at that. My one chance. And I'm not gonna do it. Can't get me in, Michael. No, I'm sorry. Pastor Michael's just taken. I love you, brother.
You can just call me Michael. You don't have to call me Pastor Michael, even though we're on the podcast.
No, but I like to call you. It has a ring to it for me. But
all right. Perfect.
Yeah, no, I think yay. And I think we sat in a service of a church that I think I very much enjoyed. Here in Eau Claire, not that long ago, and I would very much send people to it for right now, especially if they held convictions that were different than ours, and I think they would do a fairly good job caring and shepherding them, and love the brothers that are there. But looking around the room, if we filled out the sanctuary we were in. If we filled out the sanctuaries in all the churches, if they're all faithful and sound across the city, across this area, there would still be lost people. Right? There'd still be those who Christ is calling to himself. And I think that's part of it is the harvest is plentiful, laborers are few. The kingdom is yet going forth. Christ is yet building his church. And so we need to continue. It's not this competitive thing. And I think that's part of the Field of Dreams model. It's part of the consumption driven, attractive model that says it's a competition. If I got to get them into my church. And I think so often church plants, shuffle the deck, right? We get kind of the disgruntled Christians from that church who come to our church, but we need to do something different to reach those who aren't going to church or those who left church. There's so many people, I'm shocked, as they've, in 2020, they finally found an excuse to not go to church. They still, we're still Christians. Well, where do you go to church? Oh, we don't. So there's plenty of de-church people. And so I think, yes, 100% yes. Even if you just say, is there lost people in this city? Is the answer yes? Then we need more churches. We need people who are going to go and labor to reach them. And so that would be my answer.
And I think it's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And so as the third party here, and since it's maybe a little bit less weird for me to do it, as we're kind of drawing everything to a close with this episode, I want to ask, I don't know if you guys wanted to do this on this episode or not. I'm not aware of whether this was the plan or not, but these two guys are raising support in what they're doing in this church planting. They do have support from, our presbytery and other churches in our presbytery, but it costs a lot of money, especially to send two planters to plant a church. And so I want to ask, number one, actually, not even just money. If you or someone lives in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, hey, reach out. Even if you're in a church, we're not trying to steal anybody from churches. If you're happy in a church and it's a good, solid, biblical church, God bless you. But still, if you want to even just email the Restless Podcast, I think Matt will probably link maybe more information that you can get in touch with these two guys specifically. But I'm sure that they would love to connect with you or connect with those that that are in Eau Claire or in just the region around Eau Claire and either looking for a Reformed church or just want to get to know them. I think that would be great. And secondly, I would like it if we put some kind of link to where people could find out more about supporting you financially. If you're already giving to your church, you're already being faithful in that, and you want to find more to support, hey, the host of the Restless Podcast and somebody who's now been on the Restless Podcast and maybe again at some point are planting a church right now. And so if you have an excess of cash right now, that would be super helpful in doing this work. Is that okay for me to say? Can I say that?
I think so. Yeah. Especially the part about if you know people here in the area. And we will post links to both things. Let me add one more thing. If you are just interested in hearing about what we're doing, interested in praying for, we do send out an email letter, just a little bit about what God is doing, where we are in the plant, if you would like to receive that. And again, you can email the Restless Podcast for those things. But yeah, we would love to meet people in the area here. And we would especially, if you know people who may need a church or may not be Christians, we would love to go and talk to them. Well, that was Restless Summer. Was this a good Restless Summer season finale, Michael and Ben? Did we make it?
Yes, of course it was. Of course it was good. You guys are planting a church. It brings it back home to Wisconsin. There's so many good things about ending this way.
That's right. Rate and review this show, and you can rate and review if you want Ben to come back, because maybe now that I live in the same city, we can get him to do that again.
Wait, is this where we promo our rival podcast?
We should, dude. Look forward in 2023 after some big things are done. Maybe Ben and I will launch a rival podcast. That would be a genius move on my part. Play both sides fully.